right, so today the topic of our lesson is Pool Room Math, lesson 1.2. We're going to discuss angles first of all. An angle is defined as being two rays that share a common endpoint. And so if you look at this figure I've got right here, this is what an angle looks like. It can be small, it can be big. And so this is just a smaller one. That common endpoint that they share has a special name called a vertex. So in this case, the vertex is point Q. And then you also have two sides of the angles. The sides are the actual two rays. Now if you remember how we name a ray, we always start with the endpoint, and then we go in the direction that it continues on. So we would have ray QR and ray QP would be my two sides. Now we have a way we name angles, and we name angles with 3 points. Now one of the things we need to keep in mind is when we name those angles, we need to make sure that we always put the vertex in the middle. Okay, we always put the vertex in the middle. So this angle could be called angle Q. The reason why we could only use one letter here is because there's only one angle. If I would have multiple angles, say for example I would have another one drawn in here, and this would be like point S. You couldn't use angle Q there because understand there are multiple angles with Q as the vertex. You understand that? Because you could have this angle right here, or you could have this angle right here. So that's why angle Q wouldn't work in that instance. It works in the instance we in fact though do have. The other thing we could do is we could name this as angle RQP. So whenever you have multiple angles, you need to always use 3 letters. You name it by the two sides and the vertex. Vertex is always in the middle. So if you wonder what the angle looks like, you find the vertex. That's where your middle point is. What would be another way I could name this?
Angle PQR.
Angle PQR, very good. Angle PQR. So those are 3 ways to name it. Angle Q, angle RQP, or angle PQR. Important thing to remember is that what goes in the middle? Q, the vertex. So let's go ahead and keep going. Oh, skipped one. Go back. There we go. It says name all the angles in the figure. All right, so I'm just going to pick one. Here would be one. What would that angle be called?
T.
Okay, that one we could call T. All right, what would this angle be called?
V.
V, we could do angle V. What about this one?
UVT. Because there's multiple ones. TUV.
This has to be TUV. Reason being there are 2 angles that actually have vertex U. Because I also have this angle as well. What would that angle be named? RUV, or you could have BUR, or this could also be named angle 1. On occasion, you will have numbers that indicate angles as well. And in this case, 1 refers to that angle. So that will work. What about this angle right here? XAY, very good. And we've got one more angle to go, and that's going to be this one right here. And what's that one? YAZ. So that's a little bit about naming angles. Okay, so remember we can use numbers as well. And then let's go ahead and look at this, the measure of an angle. The measure of an angle is any value between 0 and 180 degrees. Then we have what's known as the reflex measure of an angle. The reflex measure of an angle is the largest amount of rotation between the 2 rays, but the reflex measure must be less than 360 degrees. So there's a little diagram below there that should help you with reflex measure. Notice they have GPS is 136 degrees, and then the reflex measure of angle GPS is 224 degrees. So the reflex measure is always the largest angle, the largest amount of rotation. So remember, the reflex measure is always the biggest part of the angle. So if I had, just a quick example, another example just to be aware of it. If I had an angle right here, and I'll call this A, I'll call this B, and I'll call this C. And let's just say for kicks that we know this angle is 90 degrees. What would the reflex measure of that angle be? The reflex angle is actually going to be this distance right here. And so that's going to be 270 degrees. The largest amount of rotation between the two rays, it must be less than 360. So in this case, it's going to be 270. That is the largest amount of rotation between those two rays. All right, so now what we're going to do is we're going to look at how to use a protractor. You all should have a protractor. Your protractor is going to be a little different because it's going to be open in the middle. And so this is what a protractor is used to do. It's used to measure an angle. Now, the protractor is used to measure an angle in degrees. And so if you look at your protractor, okay, you're going to notice there are two different ranges for degrees. Notice in this case that the outer one goes from 0, starts with 0 on the left, ends with 180 on the right. Do you see that? You also have an inside scale that starts on the right. It starts at 0 and goes to 180. So it's important to understand that you know there are two and that you know which one you start with. So the very first step in measuring any angle is to place the center mark of the protractor on the vertex. So you're going to place the center mark of the protractor on the vertex. So what I do is I have a little handout for you that in fact does go over that. Okay? And so it actually also has the directions for how you use a protractor. So if you look at that very first one, okay, we're going to place the center mark of the protractor on the vertex. Now your center mark is actually not the very bottom. You can kind of see your center mark is just a little bit above that, kind of where that school smart line is. Okay. Second step will be to line up the 0 mark with one side of the angle. Line up the center mark with one side of the angle. What you will do is read the measure on the protractor's scale, and then you be sure you read the scale that the 0 mark you are using. The angle in the diagram will measure 34 degrees and not 146. So I'm going to go ahead and look at this one because this is the one that you all should have. What we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and measure. Let's go ahead and measure angle 1 first of all. So you're going to go ahead and measure angle 1. So what we need to do with angle 1 is we need to go ahead and line up the center mark with the vertex of the angle. It's the very first step. Okay. Then what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and move our protractor so that it lines up with the 0 edge. So you see how I lined that up with the 0. Now in this case, I'm using the inside angle, or the inside values. So I look where that crosses on my protractor, and I see that it crosses right here. And what is the value of that right there?
17.
I have 16. Now, you're going to have a little give and take. You're not going to probably have exactly all the right answers on this one. This one's actually 16 degrees. So I have what I call the fudge factor here. I let you have about 1 or 2 degrees either way, depending on the measure. So 16 or 17, that looks good. We're going to go ahead and move into angle 2. I'm going to go ahead and stop the video, and I'll start it again for sake of time.